Hi everybody, my name's Dean Foley and welcome to the Stories of Strength session. So this one's going to be around healing, resilience and support pathways in domestic violence, awareness and education. So it's just a short recording which we'll share on social media. And the purpose of it is just, community education and prevention awareness. So this is not a counselling or any legal advice. I don't share. Please don't share any sensitive details in the comment sections on social media. But yeah, I'm really pleased to introduce you to Laura Jane Phoenix Singh.
Yeah.
Or Phoenix.
Okay. Phoenix.
Sweet. Thanks. Who's joining us through We Ali?
Yeah, Valley. Perfect.
Like on the don't take personal. I'm like the worst for pronunciation, so I am.
That's so fun.
So yeah. Anyways, also known as LJ. Which one do you
Yes.
prefer, Laura Jane or LJ?
LJ.
Okay, cool. So you're Aboriginal woman from Quandamooka and
Yeah.
Wurundjeri
Yeah.
Nations, and First Nations healing practitioner and facilitator. So her work includes cultural safety, trauma-informed support with children, young people, women, and families. And you bring deep expertise around, grounded in culture, connection, relational care, and community strength. So without further ado, thank you, and I'll let you take over to have a yarn. And but if you need me for anything, just let me know. I'll be just in the background.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks, LJ.
Hi everyone, my name's LJ. I'm a proud Quandamooka woman. I was born on Ngunnawal country. I was raised between Yuin Nation and Mianjin, and I've lived on beautiful Wadawurrung country for the past 10 years. I'm a research academic, which I have been doing for a few years now with Victoria University. I'm also an Atlantic Fellow, Senior Atlantic Fellow with the Atlantic Institute. This is a really important topic to talk about because when we think about healing, we think about how does that help us move through the world? What does it mean culturally? What does it mean in terms of recovery? So for the past 3 years, I've been working with We Are Lee, which is an organisation developed by Professor Arnie Judy Atkinson and her daughter Carly Atkinson. And it's an organisation that looks at the importance of culturally informed and trauma-informed cultural. Let's start again. It looks at the importance of culturally safe and trauma-informed care for community, and focuses on the importance of healing and recovery and what does that mean in the context of history. And, I guess how we think about the contemporary impacts of colonisation on mob. I've worked in this sector for about 10 years. I've worked predominantly with Aboriginal women and young people, particularly those who have been incarcerated or those who are in the out-of-home care system. And something that I've seen within that space is the prevalence of domestic violence and sexual assault. Actually, I think when I think about the women that I've worked with in prison, I think majority have experienced domestic violence and sexual assault. And these are things that impact us to our core. And unfortunately, this is something that arrived in so-called Australia with the ships. And it's something that has deeply impacted our community, but it's not to be mistaken as something that is cultural, because it's not. It's absolutely not cultural or part of our culture, but it's something that has been done to us as a form of colonial violence, and now it's something that's deeply impacting our community. When I think about what recovery and resilience looks like from family violence, I think it's important to start by thinking about collectiveness and collective care, and that a lot of mainstream services focus on domestic violence as an individual issue or a women's issue or something that only impacts the person or the family going through it, but it's so much bigger than that. It's something that impacts society, it impacts children, it impacts development, it impacts everyone who's surrounded by it. and even those who are not. So when we think about what recovery looks like from domestic violence and where the pathways out, we need a collective approach, something that sits within service delivery, but it's also something that sits within community itself. How do we support people to leave if that's what they choose to do? How do we support people if they don't want to leave but want to feel safe within their relationships? And how do we support or encourage men to engage in recovery and rehabilitation, particularly when we think about things like men's behaviour change projects and programs? I think that recovery can be a complex topic, because what is recovery? What is healing? And what does this mean to us individually? For me, I reflect on my own experiences, both professionally and personally, and what my understanding of domestic violence looks like now, from growing up in a home where domestic violence was experienced, having experienced domestic violence as an adult and a young person, but then also working in a space with women who are experiencing or have experienced domestic violence. And what I think about is that accessibility is key. Making sure services are culturally appropriate and trauma informed is key. And also looking at a whole of community approach. If we are seeing multiple instances of domestic violence in the same community, what's happening for them? Things like domestic violence don't happen in a vortex. They can be really heavily influenced by many different things, from access to mental health support, access to housing, poverty. But there's also the elements of power and control and direct violence and what that looks like. And so we really need to contextualize these things when we're thinking about healing and we're thinking about recovery and what that actually means. And also, in order to be resilient, or, as some people might say, bounce back from these experiences, we have to understand trauma. We have to understand what it does to us, not just on an individual sense, but on a collective sense, on a cultural sense, because all of these are deeply intertwined with how we respond to things, how we behave, how we engage with people, how we engage with our family. So it makes the issue of domestic violence itself complex, because we want women and families to recover from the experiences of domestic violence, but we also want the men who perpetrate family violence to no longer engage in such behaviour. I personally do believe that recovery is possible on both sides, and I think when we look at some of Carliac and Sendinati Judy's work, they speak to this importance of recovery for everyone. And the reason that that's so important is because this is an issue that is deeply impacted by colonization. So we really need to think about what that looks like in a contemporary setting, and what that looks like for Aboriginal people specifically. I think that when we can understand these issues, we can also start to address gaps in service. Unfortunately, a lot of people who are trying to escape family violence, or trying to understand maybe their behavior, or understand their experiences, or understand what's being done with them, the services that are required for that are deeply underfunded. They aren't always accessible. Some of them have huge wait lists, and many of the mainstream services are not always safe for Aboriginal women. And this is because they intersect with things like child protection and what it means for women who are experiencing family violence and trying to escape. We know that they're also at a higher risk of child protection involvement. So again, really complex issues. It means that people are often in fight or flight, they're in survival mode. It's really hard to consider things like recovery, resilience, healing, pathways out when you're just trying to simply survive the experience itself. At We Are Lee, we talk a lot about connection. We talk a lot about collective care and about understanding people's experiences. I think for those of us who are practitioners, this is key. We need relationality. We need people to trust us. We need the people we work with to trust us so that we can help support them in deciding what's best for them. I think through my time as a practitioner, some of the best work I've done is when it's led by the person, whether that be a young person, a family as a whole, or a woman. We have to let them tell us what they need and then guide them in that process. When people are trying to escape family violence, they don't need more services and more people trying to override or dominate their choice. We actually need to encourage them to have choice, to make decisions, and support them to understand what that looks like for them. Because then whatever decision they make, because it is ultimately their decision, we can support them in a way that lasts. And that's something I'm really passionate about is choice. There are many services when it comes to domestic violence where women can't get access unless they leave. But leaving isn't always that easy. It's not a black and white situation. There's many shades of grey. So I think that when we think about service delivery, it's also thinking about how do we support women who are leaving, who are trying to leave or escaping, but how do we also support women and children who aren't leaving? And that's not where they're at yet, because they still deserve safety and they still deserve services and they still deserve support. It's really hard to ask someone to leave domestic violence if they don't have a house or they don't have economic support, if they don't have safety and community and collective care. So I think when we think about addressing these issues from a community perspective, it's really important to be open to understanding what is collective care. How do we support women and families and men together? How do we look at the role a whole of community plays when it comes to addressing these issues? And I think that when I think about Auntie Judy's work, who is, the founder of We Are Lee, she talks a lot about that too. Like, this is not just on service delivery and practitioners. This is on community, to hold each other strong, to hold each other accountability, to hold each other to account, to acknowledge history, to acknowledge pain, and then think about how do we heal together as families, as communities. And these are really, really important aspects of recovery. And when I think about what does recovery from domestic violence look like, I think recovery and resilience is moving out of that survival mode, moving out of that fight or flight, being able to reclaim your nervous system and understand what's going on for you, what you've been through, and then being able to articulate your needs, and hopefully have people around you and services around you that are able to help you meet those needs. And sometimes it starts with the most basic of things, like I said before, housing, food, financial security. But then it branches out to, knowing who you are, what you want to do with your life, what kind of things you want to engage in to reclaim parts of you that might have been lost. I think that resilience is an interesting word as well, because what is resilience? I think Aboriginal people have been required to be resilient for a really long time. And we shouldn't have to be. We should be able to live in softness. We should be able to live in spaces where resilience isn't required 24/7. So I like to sort of think about resilience as a form of resistance. and how are we resisting against things like colonial violence, and what does that mean, both as like an individual level, but also a community on a community level. Because resilience is, it's hard to have to be resilient all the time, and I think that women, especially Aboriginal women, are often left to carry that burden more often than they should. So I would really like to think that the recovery and the support pathways out of this is not about being necessarily being resilient and it ending there, but being able to live in softness and to thrive, to regain our nervous system, to be able to regulate, to be able to articulate what's going on for us and have language that adequately describes our needs and safety and what safety looks like for us. I think so many of us haven't really got to understand or experience safety, especially those who have experienced violence, whether it be intimate family violence or intergenerational violence. Safety can be hard to find, but it is something we're all deserving of. Uh, and I think when it comes to the support pathways, we need to think about what is safety? What is safety in a service? What is safety in community? What is safety when it's not like when it's not defined by someone else? I often think about some of the work I've done with women, and it is asking them, what is safety for you? What does safety look like for you? Because safety, whilst it has like a generic definition, it can mean many different things to many different people. And that's why when we think about support pathways, we need to think about tailored support services and tailoring supports to the people that we're working with. You get better results, you get better engagement, and one size doesn't fit all. Actually, I think that very rarely works, because people are so different, their experiences are different, their needs are different. And when we're able to look at the world that way, we can find people's stories of strength. We can find hope, and we can help others see the hope and the strength that they have as individuals. Something else that I guess is really important here to talk about is that we think about power and control and we think about domestic violence relationships or intimate partner relationships. Power and control plays a big part of that. And often something that happens in those relationships is isolation. And when we feel isolated and we feel alone, strength and hope can be harder to find. So when we have women and children who are able to leave domestic violence situations, we really need to consider that collective care, that community response, that community engagement, so that the people most affected by violence still get to have a sense of belonging. And it might not necessarily be to their family, but it can be to community. And it can start by, one person, one women's group, one social event, taking them somewhere where safety is emulated. And I think, we think about support pathways and service delivery. ACCOs are often leading the way in that area. I know here in Wuthering Country where I live, we have some really strong ACCOs and support services, both formal and informal, that really assist with understanding purpose and that sense of belonging. When someone belongs to you and you belong to someone else, whether it be an individual or community, it helps you find your purpose. It helps you believe in yourself more. And once we start to believe in ourself and our power, step into that, especially when it's been taken away, healing becomes something that is possible. Change becomes something that is possible. And then when we start to see that, we start to have hope. I I really think that in a time when there are so many things happening in the world, hope is really important. And I guess for practitioners, we also have to have hope when we're in these spaces. When we are acting as a support pathway, when we are acting as the person that assists someone, whether it be an individual or family, to think about what is healing. You know, what are we doing for ourselves? What is our healing? How are we sitting on our healing journey? Auntie Judy talks about something. She calls it like burning your own wood. And I think in a time where practitioners are facing a lot of like burnout and a lot of stress and vicarious trauma as a result of like the overburdened systems, we also have to be thinking about our own healing, burning our own wood so that we can lead someone else to the fire. So they can burn their own wood and light their own fire. So it's important to consider that as well. Because these two things have to coexist alongside each other. You know, while we're helping and supporting others, we also must help and support ourselves. So what we bring into that circle, what we bring into that space, is strength, so we can help others see their own strength. And I think another thing to remember is we're not here to save people, we're here to assist them. We're here to encourage them. We're here to help them forge their own paths instead of being another person who's telling them how to walk and where to walk. We want people to have agency and autonomy. And I think a big part of recovery from experiencing family violence is autonomy and agency, and being able to reclaim your story and your experience and what works for you, and having that ability to speak to that. And this is really important when we think about that, like practitioner engagement or that person engagement or that community engagement, because we know that systems often don't provide agency autonomy. In actual fact, they often remove it, whether it be an NGO, a specialized domestic violence service, or an institution. They often don't promote agency and autonomy. So the people that sit outside of that, whether they be counselors, therapists, advocates, we really need to be reminding people that they have agency and autonomy and that they are strong and that they can do this. And that whilst it might be hard, and it almost always is, they aren't alone in that fight, but that they have the ability to fight. That they're worth defending, that they're worth believing in, and that we do, in fact, believe them. I think I think when we talk about domestic violence and we think about healing and resilience and support pathways, it's important to think about Aboriginal men and what they've experienced, and how colonization has impacted them. And that, you know, for our men that may perpetrate family violence, there's no excuse that we can make for that behavior, but it's important to think about what services can offer healing and resilience and recovery for them also. You know, here in Victoria, we have Dadi Momo, which is an amazing service that focuses on helping Aboriginal men who have perpetrated family violence and thinking about what recovery looks like. But in order to do that, we must consider colonization and colonial violence, and we must think about what that how that has impacted our culture. And you know, I do believe that where possible, we need to provide options for change. I don't work with men. I work predominantly with women and children and young women. But I have had many colleagues who have worked with men and have seen good results. But again, it's about moving beyond the individual. It's about moving to a place where we are collectively supporting each other, and thinking about what that means within our communities. because we are stronger together, and healing doesn't happen in isolation. It's not just an individual thing. We speak a lot about at WLE collective healing. And collective healing is when we come together and we support each other. And, we might be healing from our individual traumas. We might be healing from shared trauma and intergenerational trauma, but we're also collectively healing from colonial trauma and colonial violence that has hurt each and every one of our families. We've got to think about that. What is collective healing? What is collective care, and what role does that play in healing and resilience? And understanding support pathways, because support has to look like more than just services. It has to look like relationality and reciprocity. It has to look like how we treat and engage with each other, and how we want the people we work with to engage with us. One of the most important things I learned whilst working in the women's prison is that our clients don't owe us anything. They don't owe us trust. They don't owe us care. They don't owe us kindness. That's our job. It's our job to create safety. It's our job to create trust. And it's our job to understand that depending on a person's experience, and this is, especially true when we're thinking about domestic violence, is that when you've never experienced trust, or it's never been safe enough to trust someone, or your trust has been broken time and time again, it's not an easy thing to give to someone, especially a professional or a worker or a person you don't know. So it really is going in with an understanding of that, and that it's our job to develop the relationality. It's our job to understand. It's our job not to take things personally. And that, if we're so for real about things like recovery and healing, we have to do the work, and we have to understand this stuff so that we can work towards creating safe spaces that are culturally safe and trauma informed, and thinking very deeply about what that means, and thinking about what the people we work with need, and that it's their choice. We must give people choice, because when people are empowered and they have autonomy and agency and they have choice, they're able to then start to articulate what they need. And if we can't understand what people need, or we don't give them the space to articulate and contextualize what they need, we really can't help. So I would really encourage you to think about that, to have a look at some of Wiali's information that's available on the internet, to think about what being trauma informed and culturally safe means. And what does healing mean to you? I think one of the things that I've reflected on over the years is, when we speak about healing, we have to understand what healing means for us first. When we start to do that, we're able to then help other people answer that question for themselves. But healing is so many things. It's multifaceted, it's individual, it's collective, it's community, it's culture. But one thing's so for sure is that it looks different for everyone. But when we're able to get that individual healing and that collective healing in sync, we're able to heal more than the individual. We can heal the family, the community, country. This is really important when it comes to recovery. And, I think it's just important to remember that pathways out of harm are more than just support services. We need to wrap our arms as communities around people who need support, because services, they don't always meet the needs. But as Aboriginal people, we know what our communities need. We know what our families need. We know what our children need. And we just have to work together to have those discussions, and really just reflect on what's going on for us as practitioners, what's going on in our communities, what's going on for the people we work with, and try and engage where we can in a really holistic way. I think that that's really really important. You know, healing, what's the saying? Healing isn't linear. It certainly is not linear. Healing starts and finishes wherever the person who's taking that journey wants it to. And I think it's important that resilience is resistance. Aboriginal people by nature are politicized. And when we're politicized, it leaves us, it means that we're more likely to experience, you know, institutionalized racism, criminalization. All of these things can really hinder your ability to heal. But when we collectively resist against these things, we take up more space for each other, and we allow for the hard conversations to happen in safe places. Because when stories are told in safe places, healing can start. I want nothing more for particularly Aboriginal women, to stop having to be resilient and to get to be soft. But in order to do that, we must first step into the resistance. When we step into resistance, recovery is possible. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope that you have a deadly day. It was lovely hanging out with you all.
Cool. That was amazing. Yeah, really appreciate that, LJ.
I feel like I just rambled, so hopefully it was all right.
I know it was great. It was perfect. And I've got some quick questions if you've got the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so you might have already talked about this, like individual focus with support pathways and all that kind of stuff. But I'll just put down, like, what does the culturally safe support pathway look like in practice?
Yeah, look, I think this is a question that we're getting asked more and more, especially like as Aboriginal people who are in like the training space. And I think to be culturally safe, you have to be culturally conscious first, which means that for non-Indigenous people, you have to understand history, you have to understand your own biases, you have to understand your own identity. Because when you start to understand that, you can start to understand other people's experiences. And, you know, culturally safe, it's such an interesting term now because people do culturally safe training. They, you know, they read a book or whatever and they consider themselves to be culturally safe. But I don't think even Aboriginal people aren't always culturally safe. It's an ongoing act. It's something you have to continuously do. You have to continuously educate yourself about what's going on in the world, but also look inside, because we all have biases. We all have views that we might have of people. And in order to be culturally safe, you have to constantly be challenging that. You know, you have to be aware, and you have to be compassionate to yourself and others, but you also have to be working toward that cultural competency and that understanding that it's continuing on. I think that for me, a red flag of when someone isn't culturally safe is when they make a point to say that they are, because it's a continued learning. No one knows everything about culture or cultural identity, whether it be your own or someone else's. So just constantly be engaging in it. In terms of services, they also need to be putting in the work and making sure that their staff are consistently and continuously getting access to education and training.
That's amazing. Thanks for sharing. And just the last one, what is one takeaway you hope people will remember from this show?
Be relational. Remember that, like, the people that we work with, they don't owe us anything. It's our job to create safety. It's our job to be trauma informed, and it's our job to know where we are on our own healing journey, so we know what we're bringing to the space. Auntie Judy talks about burning our own wood, and we really need to do that work, because if we're hurting and we're hurt, or we're going through vicarious trauma or burnout, we're bringing that with us, whether it's intentional or not. So, you know, it's that being relational, take care of yourself, and know, if you can know what you need, you can help someone else to start to understand what they might need.
Perfect. Yeah, appreciate again your time and your knowledge, expertise with this. It's been really invaluable, really educational. So thank you, LJ, and I really appreciate the care, cultural knowledge, and the healing lens you brought to this yarn. Thank you, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, you too. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.